Before the galaxy knew his name, he was just a shadow, waiting to strike. Long before the Clone Wars, before the rise of the Empire, before the fall of the Jedi, there was a whisper in the darkness, a presence unseen, unheard, yet always there. It did not demand attention. It did not announce itself. Instead, it moved between the lines of history, pulling the threads of fate with silent precision. To the galaxy, he was nothing more than a man, a politician from a world known for its art and diplomacy, a representative of peace in an age of complacency. But to those who listened closely, there were signs. A voice too measured, a gaze too knowing. Beneath the mask of civility, something waited, something patient, something inevitable. The galaxy's greatest tragedies did not begin with armies, nor with battles. They began in shadows, where whispers turned to ideas, ideas to plans, and plans to absolute power. Behind every crisis, behind every war, behind the greatest betrayal in galactic history, there was a singular force, one that did not seek mere destruction, but control. For power is not always taken by force. Sometimes it is given freely to the one who asks for it last. To the Republic, he was Senator Palpatine. To the Sith, he was the Dark Lord reborn. The galaxy knew him as Sheev Palpatine, a kind, soft-spoken senator from Naboo, a politician who listened, who understood. He had no airs of arrogance, no bluster, no obvious hunger for power. Unlike the ambitious warlords and greedy bureaucrats of Coruscant, he was patient, modest, unassuming. Yet behind this mask of humility lurked something far more dangerous than any warlord. Beneath the gentle smile was a mind that had already seen the future, and a will that had already decided its course. To the Senate, he was a servant of democracy. To the Sith, he was its last, greatest hope. For the teachings of the dark side had not died with Darth Bane. They had not faded into history. They had simply been waiting, nurtured, cultivated, passed down through a single line. And in Palpatine, they had found their chosen vessel. He did not rage like his predecessors. He did not conquer with fire and blade. He understood that true power wasn't seized in battle. It was accepted in desperation. And so, while the Jedi basked in their own hubris, blind to the storm gathering in the shadows, the Dark Lord of the Sith sat in the Senate and smiled. He did not seize power by force. He made others beg him to take it. The Republic had not been overthrown overnight. It had been dying for decades, its rot spreading from within. Petty squabbles in the Senate, corruption among the elite, a Jedi Order too arrogant to see its own irrelevance. The Republic had grown complacent, and complacency was the true ally of the Sith. Sidious did not force his will upon the galaxy. He did not need to. He simply guided it, tilted the scales ever so slightly in the right direction. A whisper in the ear of a struggling politician, a suggestion to a desperate leader, a crisis manufactured at just the right time. Slowly, deliberately, he shaped the narrative. The Jedi, once protectors of the peace, would become symbols of inefficiency. The Senate, once a beacon of democracy, would be seen as weak, incapable of maintaining order. And when the time came, when the people could no longer bear the uncertainty, they would turn to the one man who had been there all along, not as a conqueror, not as a tyrant, but as a savior. And when they offered him the keys to the Republic, when they asked him to take control, he would not hesitate. For power was never something to be stolen. It was something to be given, willingly. Before the Clone Wars, before the Empire, before Order 66, there was a plan. Long before the first clone was grown, before the first battle droid was deployed, the war had already been won. Sidious understood that wars were not fought on battlefields. They were fought in the minds of those who waged them. A single conflict could not bring an empire into being, but the right sequence of conflicts, the right escalation of fear, that was another matter entirely. He needed a war, not to defeat his enemies, but to reshape the galaxy itself, to turn allies into adversaries, to create a crisis so great that the Republic itself would demand its own destruction. And so, the pieces were placed upon the board. First, there was Count Dooku, a Jedi disillusioned with his order, seeking purpose in a broken system. He would not know he was merely a pawn. He would believe himself a true Sith, a chosen successor. His arrogance would blind him. His loyalty would ensure his fall. Then came the Separatists, a movement built not from rebellion, but from manipulation. Planets convinced they had no choice but to fight. Systems pushed to war by whispers in the dark. And at the heart of it all, there was the clone army, commissioned in secret, grown in the shadows, waiting for a war that had already been decided. The Republic would call for action, the Jedi would become soldiers, and the war would rage, feeding the flames of division until there was only one solution left. A single, decisive moment, a call for absolute order, a vote that would change history. And when that moment came, there would be no resistance, no hesitation, because by then, the galaxy would already belong to him. Was darkness his destiny? Or did he carve his own path into the abyss? Fate, destiny, prophecy. These are the words the Jedi clung to, the illusions they wrapped themselves in to make sense of the chaos around them. They believed in balance, in a universe where light and darkness moved in harmony, bound by some grand, unseen design. But the Sith did not see the galaxy this way. To them, there was no destiny, only will. No fate, only the choices one had the strength to make. And so the question remains, was Sheev Palpatine always meant to become Darth Sidious, the Dark Lord who would consume the galaxy? Or was it a decision forged in time, a path shaped by his own ambition, his own hunger for power? There are no records of his early years that reveal a moment of transformation, no single event that cast him into the shadows. What is known is that he was born into wealth, privilege, and influence, yet none of it satisfied him. From a young age, he understood something others did not, that true power was not given, nor inherited. It was taken. Was the dark side always within him, a seed waiting to bloom? Or did he listen to whispers only he could hear, whispers that told him the truth? That power was the only law that mattered? Perhaps the Jedi would claim he was always doomed to fall. But the Sith knew better. Doom was never the right word. It was destiny, but one of his own design. Born into privilege, young Sheev Palpatine was destined for greatness, but not in the way his family imagined. Naboo was a world of beauty, culture, and refinement, a planet untouched by war, ruled by diplomacy and tradition. Its people valued intellect over aggression, art over conflict, and in the upper echelons of its noble class, power was not measured by strength, but by influence. Sheev Palpatine was born into this world, a child of wealth, legacy, and expectation. His family, like many in the aristocracy, saw their lineage as part of Naboo's proud history, bound by duty to uphold its values. From the moment he could speak, he was groomed for a life of public service, taught the importance of diplomacy, the power of rhetoric, and the necessity of patience. He was meant to follow the path of his ancestors, to become a senator, a leader, a dignitary who would serve with honor. But Sheev was not like the others. Even as a child, he saw the limitations of those around him, their reluctance to act, their obsession with ideals over results. He listened to his tutors speak of law and order, of democracy and fairness, and beneath his polite nods and well-practiced smiles, he rejected every word. His father was a man of status, respected but cautious. He played within the rules of the game, never daring to change them. To Sheev, this was weakness. He did not wish to inherit power. He wished to create it. He did not desire wealth. He sought control. The traditions of Naboo were chains, and he would not be bound by them. Where others saw structure, he saw opportunity. Where others obeyed, he learned to manipulate. And while his family believed they were shaping him into a leader, they never realized that the boy they were raising had already chosen his own path. A path that would lead him far beyond Naboo's gentle ways. While others sought status, Palpatine sought dominion over people, over fate, over the Force itself. There was a hunger inside Sheev Palpatine, one that no wealth, no title, no recognition could satisfy. He did not simply desire power, he craved absolute dominion. While other noble children were content with prestige, he studied the art of control. He watched how words could shift the tide of a debate, how fear could silence dissent, how a single well-placed whisper could ruin an enemy more effectively than any weapon. The aristocracy of Naboo prided itself on civility, but beneath their polished exteriors, Palpatine saw what truly governed them: greed, self-interest, and the quiet terror of losing what they had. And so he began to experiment. It started small, a carefully phrased rumor planted in passing that turned trusted allies into bitter rivals. A subtle shift in loyalty among his peers, orchestrated without them ever realizing they had been played. He learned how to make others act in his interests, all while believing it was their own idea. His father, a man of discipline and order, grew wary of his son's growing ambition. There was something unnatural about Sheev's ability to influence, something unsettling in the way he never showed doubt, never displayed weakness. He spoke with precision, with confidence beyond his years. His father tried to correct him, to remind him of the virtues of humility. But Sheev did not listen. Humility was for the weak. By the time he reached adolescence, it was clear that he was more than just another noble's son. He was something else entirely, something that his family and the world around him had no way of understanding. And when the whispers of a mysterious teacher reached his ears, promising knowledge beyond anything Naboo could offer, Palpatine did not hesitate. He was ready. In the shadows, a Sith Lord saw what others did not, a mind as sharp as a blade and a will unbreakable. There are moments in history that alter the course of the galaxy. Some are marked by war, others by betrayal, but some begin in silence, in secrecy, where two destinies collide without the world ever knowing. Sheev Palpatine's hunger for power had already set him apart from his peers, but ambition alone was not enough. He required knowledge, something greater than the wisdom of politicians, something older than the Republic itself. And in the depths of the galaxy's forgotten places, a presence had been watching. Darth Plagueis, a Sith Lord whose name was unknown to the Jedi, whose power reached beyond mere combat, beyond the limitations of the flesh. He was no warrior seeking conquest, no brute wielding the dark side like a blunt weapon. He was something far more dangerous, an architect, a visionary, a master of life and death itself. Plagueis saw in Palpatine what others did not. He did not see a privileged politician's son. He saw a mind sharp enough to slice through illusions, a will strong enough to shatter the limits of the Sith who came before. Where others sought brute strength, Palpatine understood the true nature of power, the ability to shape reality itself. The meeting was no chance encounter. Plagueis had been watching, waiting, and when the moment came, when he revealed himself to the young noble, he did not offer power freely. He offered truth. A truth that could not be unlearned, a path that once stepped upon could never be left. Palpatine did not hesitate. There was no fear, no doubt. He did not flinch at the idea of betraying everything Naboo had taught him, nor did he recoil from the dark side's call. He embraced it, welcomed it. And so, in secret, he spoke the words that had been spoken for generations, pledging himself to the teachings of the Sith. A new apprentice was born. A new darkness awakened. The Republic had no idea what had just happened. The Jedi, blinded by their own arrogance, did not feel the tremor in the Force, but the galaxy had just sealed its fate. Under Plagueis' brutal training, Palpatine honed not just his power, but his patience. The Jedi believed the dark side was chaos, an uncontrolled fury that burned all who wielded it. But Plagueis taught Palpatine otherwise. The true power of the Sith was not in destruction. It was in control, and control required discipline. Under Plagueis, Palpatine was pushed to the limits of his mind and body. His master did not teach through kindness or encouragement. The Sith did not train apprentices to succeed. They trained them to survive, to endure, to outlast all others. He was taught the nature of fear, not simply how to wield it as a weapon, but how to make it a foundation of power. He learned that the greatest leaders did not rule by love or loyalty, but by necessity. That the most dangerous enemy was not the one who fought back, but the one who believed resistance was futile. Plagueis did not care for lightsaber duels or battle strategies. He taught his apprentice something far more valuable: how to become inevitable. And yet, as the lessons continued, as Palpatine delved deeper into the secrets of the Sith, something else grew within him. A realization. Plagueis saw himself as the future, as the Sith Lord who would finally break the chains of death itself. He believed he was the culmination of 1,000 years of Sith knowledge, but Palpatine saw something different. He saw weakness. Plagueis, for all his brilliance, was still bound by his own arrogance. He believed knowledge alone made him powerful. But Palpatine understood something deeper. True power required not just wisdom, but ambition. And ambition could not be shared. So even as he learned, even as he listened, Palpatine was already planning. He played the role of the loyal apprentice, absorbing everything Plagueis had to offer. But in the shadows of his own mind, another thought grew. One day, there would be no Darth Plagueis. There would only be him. Power demands sacrifice. To truly become Sith, Palpatine had to destroy his past. There comes a moment in every Sith's journey when a choice must be made. A moment when the past must be severed, when weakness must be discarded. For Sheev Palpatine, that moment came in blood. Darth Plagueis had long spoken of power as an illusion, a construct shaped by the will of those bold enough to seize it. But there was another lesson, one that could not be taught with words alone. To ascend, one must break ties to the life that came before. Not in theory, not in practice, but in action. And so the test was set. There was a man, someone close to Palpatine, someone who had once guided him, believed in him. Perhaps a mentor, a rival, or even a member of his own family. A figure who stood as a reminder of the boy he once was, the boy he could no longer be. Plagueis did not tell him what to do. He did not demand it. He simply presented the truth. To move forward, one must leave the past behind. Palpatine did not hesitate. The act was not driven by rage. There was no hesitation, no guilt, no remorse. As life faded from his victim's eyes, He felt something shift within him, not fear, not doubt, but clarity. The man he had been no longer existed. There was only what remained. In that moment, he understood. The Sith did not kill out of anger. They did not destroy for the sake of destruction. They cut away weakness as one prunes a dying branch from a great tree. This was not murder. It was evolution. To the galaxy, he was still Sheev Palpatine. But in the shadows, Darth Sidious was born. The transformation was complete, yet no one knew it had happened. The Republic still saw him as a promising young politician, a rising star in Naboo's aristocracy. The Senate welcomed him as an idealist, a voice of reason among the self-serving elite. They saw only what he wanted them to see. For all their wisdom, for all their power, neither the Republic nor the Jedi understood the greatest weapon of all: deception. The Sith of old had failed because they had made themselves known. Warlords with crimson blades screaming their defiance into the void. Palpatine would not make the same mistake. The mask of Sheev Palpatine would remain, smiling, humble, unassuming. He would speak of peace, of democracy, of the virtues of the Republic. He would shake hands with those who feared him, earn the trust of those who would one day kneel before him. And in the darkness, behind closed doors, the real work would begin. Darth Sidious did not need to conquer the galaxy. He only needed it to let him in. To master the dark side, one must first surrender to it, body, mind, and soul. The Jedi saw the Force as harmony, a current to be followed rather than controlled. They spoke of balance, restraint, of bending the Force only so far as nature allowed. But the Sith knew better. The Force was not a passive stream. It was a raging storm, a force of chaos that could be shaped, twisted, and commanded by those strong enough to wield it. Under Darth Plagueis, Sheev Palpatine learned this truth in the most brutal way imaginable. The lessons were not gentle, nor were they designed to simply instruct. They were meant to break him, to shatter the last remnants of who he had been and forge something new from the wreckage. Plagueis was no mere teacher. He was a scientist, an experimenter, and Palpatine was his most promising subject. Pain became a tool. Fear became a weapon. Through relentless trials, he was stripped of everything but his will, forced to endure agonies beyond the comprehension of lesser beings. Deprivation, isolation, and near-death experiences were all part of the process, each designed to tear apart the limitations of the mind and reshape them into something stronger. And as he suffered, he learned. He studied ancient texts long forbidden to the Jedi, tomes inscribed with knowledge that had been buried for centuries. He absorbed the teachings of Sith Lords long forgotten, those who had experimented with power in its rawest form. There were no lectures, no structured lessons, only immersion, an endless descent into the abyss where only the worthy could survive. Sidious came to understand what Plagueis had discovered: the nature of fear. Not simply how to use it, but how to become it. The Jedi sought to inspire, to lead through trust and admiration. But Sidious would command obedience through something far greater: inevitability. He learned how to wield deception not as a tool, but as an art. How a carefully placed word could undo entire legacies, how a single whisper could set the course of history. Power was not about strength alone. It was about control. Control over perception, control over belief, control over fate itself. And then there was the deepest secret, the one that had consumed Plagueis' mind, the power over life and death. Sidious watched as his master delved into forbidden experiments, attempting to harness the Force to manipulate the very fabric of existence. The ability to create life, the ability to cheat death. These were the ultimate ambitions of the Sith, the key to true immortality. Plagueis believed he was close, but Palpatine? Palpatine believed that power was not meant to be shared. Even as he learned, even as he absorbed every lesson Plagueis had to offer, one truth became undeniable. The rule of two had always been absolute. And in time, there would be only one. Power is not taken by force alone. It is won in the minds of those who serve it. The Sith had always believed in strength. They had built empires upon war, carved their legacies into the galaxy through fire and blood. And yet, for all their victories, for all their power, they had always fallen. Time and time again, the Jedi endured, the Republic persisted, and the Sith were cast back into the shadows. But Sheev Palpatine saw what those before him had not. The Sith did not fail because they lacked power. They failed because they revealed it too soon, because they allowed themselves to be seen, because they struck before the blade was truly at their enemy's throat. And so, while Plagueis taught him the raw strength of the dark side, Sidious learned a lesson his master never intended. True power was not in brute force, but in control. Not in taking, but in making others give. Plagueis believed in science, in shaping the Force through sheer will, in transcending death itself. He sought to conquer nature. But Sidious? Sidious sought to conquer people. To him, war was not waged on battlefields, but in the minds of those who fought them. The Republic, the Senate, even the Jedi, they did not need to be overthrown. They needed to be guided, shaped, led to their own destruction, unaware of the hand that had brought them there. Deception was not merely a tool, it was a foundation, a philosophy, the very essence of power itself. And so he refined his craft. He learned the art of patience, of saying the right words at the right time, of letting enemies believe they had won long before they realized they had lost. While the Sith Lords of old had raged against the Republic, Sidious would be welcomed into its highest ranks. While the Jedi had stood against the darkness for 1,000 generations, he would make them soldiers in his war. Every lesson Plagueis taught him, about fear, about control, about the nature of the Force, Sidious twisted to fit his own vision. His master saw him as an apprentice, a student who would carry on the Sith's legacy. But Sidious saw himself as something more. He was not a servant of the dark side. He was not bound by the traditions of the past. He was the dark side. And when the time came, when the galaxy was ready, when the Republic had crumbled and the Jedi had fallen, he would not need to seize power. The galaxy would hand it to him. The rule of two demands a master and an apprentice. Tonight, the master dies. For years, Darth Plagueis had believed himself invincible. He was not like the Sith Lords who came before him, reckless, ambitious, doomed by their own impatience. No, Plagueis had mastered the long game. He had moved in silence, hidden in the shadows, and secured an apprentice who would carry his vision forward. But even the wise can be blind. Even the strong can be deceived. Plagueis had taught Sidious everything: how to wield fear, how to shape destiny, how to bend the Force itself. And yet, he had ignored the greatest lesson of all. The rule of two was not a bond of loyalty. It was a cycle, a law of nature. One must live, one must die. Sidious had known this for years. He had known it the moment he became Plagueis' apprentice, the moment he spoke the words that bound him to the Sith. But knowledge was not enough. Timing was everything. To strike too early was to risk failure. To wait too long was to risk irrelevance. And so he played his role. He listened, learned, feigned loyalty. He watched as Plagueis pursued the secret of immortality, lost in his own arrogance, believing himself above the fate that had claimed every Sith Lord before him. But Sidious did not seek eternal life. He sought absolute power, and absolute power could not be shared. And so, on the night of his ascension, Sidious chose his moment. Plagueis lay before him, vulnerable, unsuspecting. The great Sith Lord, who had unlocked the secrets of life itself, now drunk on his own success, believing his apprentice to be nothing more than an extension of his will. But Sidious was not an extension. He was the future. There was no grand declaration, no final warning. There was only the cold efficiency of betrayal, the fulfillment of the Sith's greatest truth. The master dies, the apprentice rises. Plagueis did not die quickly. Sidious had ensured that. There was no honor in the kill, no moment of understanding between master and apprentice. Only suffering. Plagueis had spent his life seeking mastery over death, and so Sidious made sure he felt every moment of his own. And when it was done, when the last breath left the once great Sith Lord, there was silence. No witnesses, no fanfare, no recognition from the galaxy that its fate had just been sealed. Only one man, standing alone in the dark, no longer an apprentice, no longer bound by another's will. Darth Sidious had been born, and the galaxy would never be the same. A weapon of rage, a blade forged in darkness, Darth Maul was his first step toward galactic domination. Darth Sidious understood what many Sith before him had failed to grasp. Victory was not won in a single strike. It required layers, distractions, and contingency plans. To claim the galaxy, he needed more than just power. He needed weapons, and his first would be Darth Maul. Maul was unlike any apprentice before him. He was not meant to be a successor, not meant to learn the delicate intricacies of politics or manipulation. He was not a strategist, nor a schemer. He was a blade, crafted, sharpened, and honed for a single purpose. Sidious found him as a child, a Zabrak taken from Dathomir, where the dark side ran deep in the blood of the Night Sisters and their kin. Even then, Maul was different. His hatred was not taught. It was instinctive, raw, unshaped. Sidious did not have to create his rage. He only needed to focus it. And so the training began. Maul was broken down, reforged through agony and discipline. Pain was his teacher, suffering his companion. He was stripped of everything but the singular drive to kill, to hunt, to serve. Sidious did not train Maul as he had been trained. There were no lessons in patience, no discussions on philosophy or the subtleties of control. Maul was not meant to rule. He was meant to destroy. The Jedi, so confident in their order, would never suspect a Sith so primal, so consumed by the dark side. They would see him as a brute, a mindless enforcer, and in that they would fail to see the truth. Maul was a distraction, a smokescreen for Sidious's greater design. When the time came, he would be unleashed. And the galaxy, still blind to the shadows creeping upon it, would believe that he was the true Sith. But they would be wrong, because while Darth Maul was a weapon forged in darkness, he was not the Sith Lord destined to break the galaxy. That honor belonged to another. One day, the Jedi's greatest hope would become his greatest weapon. Darth Sidious knew that Maul, for all his ferocity, was not the apprentice who would carry the Sith into the future. He was a pawn, a necessary tool in a larger game. But the true apprentice, the one who would complete the Sith's grand design, had not yet been found. Sidious did not need a mindless enforcer. He needed something far greater. He needed someone with power beyond measure, someone whose soul could be twisted, whose strength could be shaped into something unstoppable. He needed a Jedi. The Jedi were blind, arrogant in their supposed wisdom. They took children from their families, trained them to suppress emotion, to deny attachments. But in doing so, they created something vulnerable, something fragile. Sidious understood what the Jedi refused to see. True strength came not from suppressing emotion, but from embracing it. Anger, fear, loss. These were not weaknesses, they were fuel. And so he waited. He watched the Jedi Order, searching for the one who would become his greatest creation. He needed someone strong in the Force, strong enough to rival even the greatest Jedi. But strength alone was not enough. They had to be broken. They had to suffer, because only through suffering could they be remade. And in time, Sidious would find him. A boy born of mystery, touched by the Force in a way no one had seen before. A child who would be hailed as the Chosen One, the Jedi's greatest hope. But hope was a fragile thing. And when it broke, when that boy fell into darkness, he would not rise again. He would kneel, and in that moment, the Sith would have their ultimate victory. With words sharper than any lightsaber, he climbed the ranks of power unseen. The Sith had always been warriors, conquerors, warlords who sought to take power by force, crushing all who stood in their way. But Darth Sidious understood what they never could. True power wasn't seized in battle. It was given, offered freely by those who believed they were making the choice themselves. The Republic was already dying when he arrived. It had not yet collapsed, not yet crumbled under the weight of its own corruption, but the decay had begun. The Senate, once a symbol of democracy, had become bloated with bureaucracy, infested with greed, and blind to the suffering of the people it claimed to serve. The Jedi, once protectors of peace, had become complacent, shackled by their own outdated philosophies. Sidious did not need to destroy them. He only needed to guide them toward their inevitable downfall. His rise in the Senate was effortless. He played the role of the humble servant, the wise statesman from Naboo who sought only to preserve peace and order. He spoke with conviction, with charm, with sincerity so convincing that even the most seasoned politicians could not see the deception beneath his words. He was not ambitious. He was not seeking power. He simply wanted to help. And so, they gave it to him. When the Trade Federation threatened Naboo, Sidious did not intervene as a Sith Lord. He intervened as Senator Palpatine, a concerned politician advocating for his people. He manipulated Queen Amidala, fueling her desperation, orchestrating her plea for help. And when the Senate failed her, when the Republic's inefficiency became undeniable, he positioned himself as the only solution. It was through her voice that his power grew, a vote of no confidence in Chancellor Valorum, a call for strong leadership. And when the moment came, the Senate turned to him, not because he demanded it, but because they believed he was the only choice. But Sidious did not stop with the Republic. He understood that the Jedi were his greatest threat, not because they were strong, but because they were blind. They believed in peace, in stability, in the idea that their wisdom could guide the galaxy. But they had already lost their way. Their code had made them rigid, their arrogance had made them weak. And so he planted the seeds of their destruction. He whispered to Count Dooku, a Jedi disillusioned with the Order, feeding his doubts, stoking his resentment. He turned a noble warrior into Darth Tyrannus, a leader for a cause that did not yet exist. Dooku believed he was shaping the future, but in truth, he was another pawn, another tool in Sidious' grand design. The Separatist movement, the Clone Wars, the conflict that would consume the galaxy. It was all a game, orchestrated from the shadows. The Republic would beg for strength. The Jedi would fight a war they could not win. And when the time came, when they were weak and desperate, the Senate would not resist when Sidious took full control. Not as a tyrant, not as a conqueror, but as their savior. a war engineered by one man, fought by millions, and won before the first battle even began. Wars are often fought for power, for territory, for survival. But the Clone Wars were different. They were not waged for conquest or defense, nor for freedom or tyranny. They were orchestrated, designed with a singular purpose: to hand absolute control to one man. Darth Sidious had no need for armies of his own. He did not march onto the battlefield with a crimson blade, nor did he stand before his enemies as a conqueror. Instead, he played both sides, pulling the strings of a war that had been decided long before the first shot was fired. The Republic and the Separatists, two factions locked in endless conflict, each believing themselves righteous, each blind to the truth. The galaxy saw them as bitter enemies, locked in a struggle for dominance. But in truth, they were two hands of the same master. Sidious had ensured their creation. He had whispered to the Republic, stoking their fears of disorder and rebellion, convincing them that war was the only path to stability. He had whispered to Count Dooku, feeding his resentment against the Jedi, promising him a new order, a galaxy ruled by strength. Dooku believed himself a visionary, the leader of a revolution. But he was nothing more than a pawn, a necessary sacrifice in Sidious' grand design. The Separatists were never meant to win. Their warships, their droid armies, their leaders, all of them were tools, created not to overthrow the Republic, but to strengthen it under the banner of a single ruler. Their victories would justify the Republic's militarization. Their atrocities would demand stronger leadership. And their ultimate defeat would pave the way for something far greater than democracy. To ensure this, Sidious needed more than just politics. He needed warriors, figures who would drive the war forward, ensuring that it escalated, that it spread like wildfire across the stars. And so, he created them. Count Dooku, the Sith Lord who stood at the Separatists' helm, commanding their forces with the authority of a statesman and the cunning of a Sith. To the Republic, he was a traitor, a Jedi turned tyrant. To Sidious, he was a means to an end. Then there was General Grievous, a terror on the battlefield, a monster forged in war. Sidious had ensured his transformation, shaping him into a weapon that would strike fear into the Jedi, forcing them into the very battles that would lead to their downfall. Through them, the war unfolded exactly as Sidious had planned. The Jedi, once peacekeepers, became generals, soldiers in a conflict they did not understand. They fought bravely, but they fought blind, unable to see that with every battle, they played further into Sidious' hands. The war consumed them, spread them across the galaxy, stretched them thin. And when the time came, when they were too weak, too distracted, too few, Sidious would strike the final blow. The galaxy believed the Clone Wars were fought for the fate of the Republic. But in truth, they were fought for the rise of an empire. In a single moment, the Guardians of Peace became the hunted, and the galaxy was forever changed. The Jedi had stood for 1,000 generations, protectors of peace, defenders of justice. They had outlasted wars, survived conflicts, and endured the rise and fall of empires. They believed themselves unshakable, the unbreakable shield of the Republic. But their doom did not come from an enemy outside their walls. It came from within. For years, Darth Sidious had orchestrated their downfall, weakening them not with war, but with corruption, deception, and the slow erosion of their purpose. The Clone Wars had turned them from peacekeepers into soldiers, drawing them further from the ideals that had once made them strong. The Jedi had become scattered, their forces spread across the galaxy, their vision clouded by war. And when the time came, when they were exhausted, distracted and blind to the enemy in their midst. Sidious struck the final blow. With a single command, the galaxy shifted. The Republic, which the Jedi had fought to defend, turned against them, the very soldiers they had led into battle. The clones, bred for obedience, for loyalty, became their executioners. Execute Order 66. It was not just an order, it was a death sentence. Across the stars, the Jedi fell. In battlefields, in war rooms, in temples they had once called home. There was no warning, no chance to fight back. The clones, programmed for absolute obedience, did not hesitate. Blaster fire cut down masters and apprentices alike, warriors who had once been hailed as legends reduced to fugitives in a matter of moments. The Jedi Temple, the heart of their order, became a tomb. And leading the slaughter was not just a Sith Lord, it was one of their own. Anakin Skywalker had been the Jedi's greatest hope, the prophesied chosen one, the hero of the Clone Wars, the warrior who was meant to bring balance to the Force. But hope had turned to despair, and the hero had become the monster. Darth Sidious had shaped him well. He had whispered in his ear, fed his fears, nurtured his rage. He had shown him the flaws of the Jedi, their hypocrisy, their weakness. And when the moment came, when Anakin stood at the crossroads of destiny, he did not choose the light. He chose power. He marched into the Jedi Temple, no longer the man he had once been, but something else entirely. Darth Vader. He did not hesitate. He did not falter. Jedi Knights, Jedi Masters, even the younglings, none were spared. The halls that had once been filled with the voices of students, the laughter of children learning the ways of the Force, became silent, save for the hum of a crimson blade. And in the shadows, watching from his throne, Darth Sidious smiled. The war was over. The Republic was his. The Jedi were no more. And in their place, an empire would rise. With the Jedi extinguished, the Republic gasped its last breath, only to be reborn as an empire of fear. The Republic had been dying for years. It had not fallen in battle, nor had it crumbled beneath the weight of a foreign enemy. It had been poisoned from within, its ideals eroded by corruption, its guardians betrayed by their own arrogance. And now, at last, it lay in ruin, ready for something new to take its place. Darth Sidious had spent decades in the shadows, guiding the Republic toward this moment. He had orchestrated war, turned heroes into villains, transformed allies into enemies. And now, with the Jedi swept away, with the Republic too weak to resist, he no longer needed to hide. It was time to step into the light. Before the Senate, before the leaders of the Republic who still clung to the illusion of democracy, he stood, not as Chancellor Palpatine, the soft-spoken servant of the people, but as something greater, as the voice of power itself. With careful words, he spoke of peace, of stability. He painted the Jedi as traitors, as warmongers who had sought to overthrow the very Republic they had sworn to protect. He spoke of the war, the suffering, the destruction that had spread across the galaxy. And he offered a solution. In order to ensure the security and continuing stability, the Republic will be reorganized into the first Galactic Empire. The words echoed through the Senate chamber, carried not by force, but by the will of the people themselves. There was no outcry, no rebellion, only applause, thunderous, deafening applause. The galaxy had been so desperate for peace that it did not see the chains being placed around its neck. The senators, the politicians, the leaders of a once proud republic, they did not resist. They celebrated. They cheered as the last remnants of democracy were stripped away. The republic was dead, and in its place, the empire was born. Sidious did not seize power. He was given it, handed the throne by those who believed they had won. They did not realize, not yet, that they had not been saved. They had been conquered. It would take time before the galaxy understood what had truly happened, that their leader, their savior, was in fact their greatest oppressor, that the war had not been fought to end tyranny, but to replace it. And by the time they did, it would be too late, for the Sith had finally won, and the dark side now ruled the galaxy. With no opposition left, Sidious' rule became absolute, and fear became the foundation of the new order. The war had ended. The Republic had fallen. The Jedi were gone. But peace did not follow. Darth Sidious had not seized power to bring balance, nor to rebuild what had been broken. His empire was not one of prosperity, it was one of submission. Where once the Republic had ruled with diplomacy, the Empire ruled with fear. And fear, he knew, was the most powerful force in the galaxy. From the moment the Empire was declared, every system, every planet, every being felt its weight. The Senate remained, but only as a formality, its members reduced to little more than voices in a chamber that no longer mattered. The imperial military became the law, its soldiers no longer protectors, but enforcers. Dissent was not debated, it was crushed. Every sector, every world, every government was forced to swear loyalty. There were no exceptions. Those who obeyed were permitted to exist. Those who resisted simply ceased to. Entire species were enslaved. Civilizations were wiped away with a single command. This was the true face of the Empire, not a nation but an instrument of control, and Sidious wielded it with ruthless precision. Tyrants of the past had ruled with armies alone. But Sidious understood something deeper. An enemy seen could be fought, but an enemy unseen could never be defeated. The Empire was not just a force of military power. It was a specter that haunted every world, a constant, inescapable shadow. Imperial spies watched from the corners of every city. Citizens learned to whisper in their own homes, uncertain of who might be listening. The holonet, once a tool of free communication, became a weapon of propaganda, rewriting history to shape the Emperor's truth. Stormtroopers patrolled the streets, their presence a reminder that the Empire was always watching. But more terrifying than those in armor were those who did not wear it, the unseen agents of the Emperor's will, those who could be anywhere, anyone. Fear was no longer just a response, it was a way of life. But there was one threat Sidious could not allow to linger. The Jedi were broken, scattered, their numbers all but eradicated. But to Sidious, even one Jedi was too many. He had spent years dismantling their legacy, turning the galaxy against them, branding them as traitors. But he knew the truth. So long as a single Jedi lived, the Sith would never be truly secure. And so the hunt began. Sidious did not need to dirty his own hands. He had created the perfect enforcer, the one Jedi who had not died, but had been remade in darkness. Darth Vader, the man who had once been Anakin Skywalker, the Jedi's greatest hope, had become their greatest nightmare. He did not simply kill those who remained. He hunted them, tracked them to the farthest corners of the galaxy, ensuring that no spark of their order would ever reignite. But even Vader could not do it alone. And so, the Inquisitors were born. Former Jedi who had fallen to the dark side, twisted into instruments of Imperial will. They were not Sith, for Sidious would never allow rivals to his power. They were something lesser, something incomplete, yet still powerful enough to do what needed to be done. Together, they scoured the stars. Jedi who had once stood tall were reduced to ghosts, forced into hiding, living in the shadows of a galaxy that had once called them heroes. Some tried to fight, they all failed. Because this was not a war. It was an extermination. Sidious had not simply destroyed the Jedi. He had erased them, their temples burned, their teachings outlawed, their history rewritten. and those who had once followed them now feared even to speak their name. With every enemy eliminated, Sidious' vision came closer to completion. The Empire was not just a government. It was not just a military. It was a machine. A perfect, unyielding system of control. Its citizens were not people. They were cogs, turning in the vast, unstoppable engine of the Emperor's will. And at the center of it all sat one man. The Sith had spent 1,000 years waiting for this moment, for a time when the Jedi were no more, when the Republic was dust, when their power was absolute. Sidious had done what no Sith before him had achieved. He had won, but victory was not enough, because for all his power, for all his control, there was one thing Sidious had not yet conquered: time. And even as he ruled, as his empire spread across the stars, another obsession grew within him. He had destroyed the Jedi. He had crushed the Republic. Now he would seek to master death itself. The Sith do not conquer for power alone. Sidious sought to defy death itself. For Darth Sidious, ruling the galaxy was never the end goal. The Empire was merely a tool, a means to an even greater ambition. Power, true power, was meaningless if it could not be held forever. The Sith had always craved immortality, but none had ever truly attained it. From Darth Bane to Darth Plagueis, every Sith Lord had searched for the secret to defying death, only to fall before achieving it. Sidious refused to share their fate. He would not be just another name in the long, blood-stained history of the Sith. He would be eternal. But the dark side did not grant immortality easily. It was not a gift to be taken. It was a secret that had to be ripped from the depths of the Force itself. And so Sidious turned to forbidden knowledge, to the ancient texts of the Sith, to rituals lost to time. He scoured the forgotten corners of the galaxy, seeking relics of dark power, devices left behind by civilizations that had long since vanished. Sidious did not merely study the past, he sought to surpass it. He turned his empire's vast resources toward unlocking the secrets of life and death. Scientists, dark side acolytes, and Sith cultists were gathered in secret facilities across the galaxy, each tasked with a single purpose: to break the limits of mortality. The most infamous of these projects led him to Exegol. A world hidden deep within the unknown regions, Exegol had been the seat of Sith power long before the rise of the Republic. A place of darkness where the ancient Sith Lords had once experimented with powers beyond comprehension. It was there that Sidious built his most secret stronghold, a place where the Sith Eternal, a fanatical cult devoted to the dark side, worked tirelessly to ensure his rule would never end. But power demanded sacrifice, and Sidious was willing to sacrifice anything. The first experiments were crude. Cloning was nothing new. Kamino had perfected the process for the Grand Army of the Republic. But Sidious did not seek to create mere soldiers. He sought a vessel, a body strong enough to contain his essence should his physical form fail. The results were imperfect. The clones created in his image were weak, unstable, unable to contain the sheer will of the dark side. Again and again, the experiments failed. Some could not survive infancy. Others lived but as broken, mindless husks. Yet he did not stop. Sidious turned to the ancient ways, seeking knowledge beyond science. He delved into Sith alchemy, testing forbidden rituals meant to transfer the soul from one body to another. He performed dark side ceremonies in the depths of Exegol, binding himself to arcane energies that even he did not fully understand. The Sith Eternal worked in secret, constructing vast fleets, preparing for the day when their master would rise again. Dark adepts whispered chants in forgotten tongues, invoking the power of the ancients. They believed that Sidious was not merely a Sith Lord, but something more, a being destined to rule beyond death itself. And yet, despite all his power, despite all his knowledge, the true secret of immortality remained just out of reach. For all his triumphs, Sidious feared one thing above all: the inevitability of death. He had crushed the Republic, annihilated the Jedi, ruled with absolute authority. But time remained his one unconquerable enemy. He had once mocked Plagueis for his obsession with cheating death. And yet, as the years passed, Sidious found himself consumed by the same fear. He had no equal, no rival who could threaten his reign, except time itself. The experiments continued, the failures mounted, but he refused to surrender. Even as his body aged, even as the dark side twisted his flesh, he would not accept weakness. The Empire would last forever. And so would he. And if it took breaking the very fabric of the Force itself, so be it. Sidious believed himself untouchable, but in his arrogance, he failed to see the one force he could not control: hope. For decades, Darth Sidious had ruled without question, without opposition. The Republic had fallen, the Jedi were extinct, and the galaxy bowed before the iron will of the Emperor. His dominion was absolute, his power unrivaled, or so he believed. He had seen himself as the embodiment of the Sith's grand vision, the ultimate master of manipulation and control. The galaxy was his to shape, his to rule. The Empire had stretched across the stars, its fleets unchallenged, its armies unquestioned. His enemies had either perished or been brought to heel. He had prepared for everything, every betrayal, every threat, every challenge that could be anticipated. And yet the one thing he had never accounted for, the one force he had dismissed as weakness, was the very thing that would lead to his undoing: hope. The rebellion should have been nothing more than a whisper in the dark, an insignificant gathering of outcasts and dreamers. He had crushed their kind before. Planets burned, families destroyed, entire civilizations erased to silence dissent. Yet, for all his power, he could not kill an idea. The harder he pressed, the more ruthlessly he struck, the brighter the spark of resistance burned. He had underestimated them. Not their weapons, nor their ships, nor their strategy, but their will, their refusal to submit. He had thought himself untouchable, the architect of an unbreakable rule. But he had forgotten one simple truth: fear could only hold power for so long. Eventually, something stronger would rise to challenge it. And that something was Luke Skywalker. Sidious had foreseen many threats: the lingering shadows of the Jedi, the betrayal of underlings, the whispers of treachery within his own court. But the boy had been unexpected. He had been nothing, a nameless farmhand on a forgotten world. He should never have mattered. And yet here he was, the son of Anakin Skywalker. The Sith believed in destiny, in the shaping of fate through will and power. But the Force had a will of its own, and it had placed its hope in a single boy. Where Sidious saw the last remnant of the Jedi, the last obstacle to his endless reign, the galaxy saw something else, a symbol, a spark, the embodiment of everything he had tried to destroy. Sidious watched as the rebellion rallied around him, as the boy grew stronger, as the legend of the Jedi was reborn in defiance of the darkness. And for the first time in decades, the Emperor felt something he had long believed beneath him: doubt. It was not Luke's strength that unsettled him. It was not his skill with a lightsaber, nor his mastery of the Force. It was something else, something deeper, the same thing that had blinded the Sith for generations: love. Sidious had built his empire on fear, had ruled through domination, through cruelty, through the destruction of all things that stood against him. He had believed that power was all that mattered, that love was weakness, that compassion was a lie. And yet, in the end, it was love that proved to be his undoing. Because Luke Skywalker did not fight alone, because the legacy of the Jedi had not been erased, because the one he had believed to be his greatest weapon, his enforcer, his apprentice, his creature of darkness, was still a man beneath the mask. Darth Vader, Anakin Skywalker, the boy's father. And in that moment, Sidious realized his greatest mistake. He had foreseen the fall of the Jedi. He had foreseen the rise of the Empire. He had foreseen his own victory. But he had never foreseen this, the return of the Jedi. 3 destinies converged in one room: Father, Son, and the Emperor who sought to break them both. The Death Star hung above Endor, a fortress in the void, the beating heart of the Empire's final gambit. It was here, in the cold and silent halls of power, that the fate of the galaxy would be decided. Not in battlefields of ships and soldiers, but in the presence of 3 beings whose choices would shape the destiny of all. Darth Sidious had planned for this moment. Every piece had moved according to his design. The rebellion had walked into his trap. The fleet would be crushed, their hopes snuffed out in fire and destruction. And here, in the Emperor's throne room, the last heir of the Jedi stood before him, teetering on the edge of darkness. Luke Skywalker, the boy who should never have mattered. The last of the Jedi, the final challenge to the Sith's eternal reign. Sidious had watched him from afar, observed his growth, his triumphs, his pain, and now he would be the one to break him. But not alone. Darth Vader stood at his side, the enforcer, the executioner, the shattered remnants of the man who had once been Anakin Skywalker. Sidious had shaped him well, bent him into something beyond redemption, beyond hope. And now, the Father would deliver the Son into darkness. The duel was inevitable. Sidious did not lift a finger. He did not need to. His weapon was not a blade, but his voice, his whispers of doubt, his cruel amusement at the futility of Jedi ideals. He watched as father and son clashed, lightsabers flashing in the dim light of his throne room, the hum of the blades echoing like fate itself. Good. Use your aggression, boy. He could feel it. Luke's anger, his fear. It was growing. His father, a figure he once pitied, now stood as an obstacle, a test. And Sidious knew the test would not be endured. It would be failed, because the Jedi always failed. Luke fought with fury, with desperation. The duel was not merely a battle of skill, but of will, of identity. Every strike was a question, every parry a challenge. Would he be the Jedi his masters had trained him to be? Or would he surrender to the truth that Sidious had whispered from the beginning? The answer came in a moment of blind rage. Vader fell, his mechanical breath rasped in agony as he crumpled beneath his son's assault. And in that moment, Sidious saw the truth. Luke had it within him. The fire, the darkness, the raw, unrelenting power that had once burned within Anakin Skywalker. Good. Your hate has made you powerful. Sidious rose from his throne, the moment of victory at hand. The cycle would be complete. The son would replace the father. The Sith would claim another apprentice. Take your father's place at my side. But then, defiance. Luke did not strike the final blow. He did not finish what had been set in motion. He cast aside his weapon, a Jedi's blade falling to the cold floor. And in that moment, Darth Sidious, master of the dark side, ruler of the galaxy, felt something he had not felt in decades. A shift, a miscalculation, a moment slipping beyond his control. I am a Jedi like my father before me. The words rang like a death knell. Sidious sneered. He had been patient. He had been kind. He had given the boy every opportunity to claim the destiny that had been placed before him. Now, there would be no more mercy. The Emperor extended his hands, and the Force itself turned to his will. Lightning, raw and unnatural, erupted from his fingertips. It consumed the air, crackling with power beyond mortal comprehension. It struck Luke, tearing through his body, sending him to the ground in agony. So be it, Jedi. This was not the refined combat of lightsaber duels, nor the careful manipulation of politics and war. This was raw, unfiltered power, the will of the dark side made manifest. Sidious unleashed his full fury, the culmination of decades of Sith knowledge. The boy would die screaming, and with him, the last hope of the Jedi would be extinguished forever. Luke convulsed beneath the storm of energy. His body burned, his strength failing. And above him, the Emperor laughed. It was over, or so he believed. For Sidious, in all his foresight, had failed to see the one variable he could never control. The man he had spent decades forging into a weapon, the apprentice who had kneeled at his feet, the creature of darkness he had molded into his ultimate enforcer, was still a father. And Darth Vader was still Anakin Skywalker. For decades, Vader was a pawn. In one moment, he became something more. Darth Sidious had won. Luke Skywalker lay broken before him, his body writhing beneath the storm of Sith lightning. The last Jedi, the final defiance of the order he had crushed, was now helpless at his feet. And the father, his greatest apprentice, his most loyal enforcer, stood by and watched. Sidious had no fear of betrayal. Why should he? Vader had been broken long ago, molded into something beyond redemption. His will had been forged in suffering, his purpose reduced to servitude. He had cast aside his name, his past, his identity. Anakin Skywalker was dead. All that remained was Darth Vader. Sidious had seen to that himself. "You have done well, my apprentice." The words dripped with mockery. He did not need Vader anymore. His strength had been useful once, a necessary instrument of the Sith's reign, but that time had passed. The boy had been the true prize. Had Luke succumbed to his hatred, had he struck down his father, the cycle would have continued. The apprentice would replace the master. But Luke had refused. He had thrown away his weapon, chosen weakness over power. He had sealed his fate. And so, Sidious would end him. The lightning surged again, raw and relentless, searing through the young Jedi's body. The throne room echoed with his screams, but the Emperor's gaze never wavered. He drank in the suffering, reveled in the final destruction of hope. "Now, young Skywalker, you will die." It was over. Or so he believed. For decades, Sidious had ruled through control, of minds, of fear, of fate itself. He had bent the galaxy to his will, turned brother against brother, turned Jedi into Sith, turned hope into ashes. But in all his calculations, in all his visions of the future, he had never foreseen this. He had never foreseen love. He had never foreseen a father's heart, buried beneath the armor, beating still. Vader had stood silent, motionless, a spectator to his master's final triumph. But something had shifted. Something Sidious, in his arrogance, had dismissed. A single cry, "Father, please!" The words were not a command, not a challenge, not an appeal to the Sith Lord who had ruled the galaxy with an iron fist. They were a plea, not to Vader, to Anakin. And for the first time in decades, the Dark Lord hesitated. For over 20 years, he had obeyed without question. He had slaughtered the Jedi, hunted them to extinction, stood at his master's side as the galaxy burned. He had believed himself lost, beyond salvation, beyond choice. But in this moment, there was a choice. And for the first time since his fall, Vader saw clearly. He saw what Sidious had done to him, twisted him into a weapon, bound him in servitude, taken everything from him. He had been told the dark side would make him strong, that it would give him power beyond his wildest dreams. But here he stood, watching his son die, powerless to stop it. Powerless. Sidious had never given him strength. He had only taken. And for the first time, the fear, the doubt, the pain, everything that had kept him chained, fell away. What remained was Anakin Skywalker. Sidious did not notice at first. He was too consumed by his own victory, too lost in the thrill of destruction. The boy's life was slipping away, the last light of the Jedi flickering out. And then, movement, a shift in the Force, a will stronger than his own. Sidious turned too late. A gloved hand gripped him from behind, tight, unyielding. For the first time in his reign, the Dark Lord of the Sith felt something he had never known. Panic. Vader lifted him effortlessly, the Emperor's protests turning to a strangled hiss. Lightning still crackled from his fingertips, wild and uncontrolled, arcing through Vader's body, searing into circuits, burning flesh and metal alike. But he did not stop. Sidious shrieked, his hands clawing at the air, his power raging in desperation. But there was no escape, no manipulation, no scheme to turn this moment in his favor. For the first time in his life, Darth Sidious had lost control. Vader stepped forward, step by agonizing step, the energy coursing through him, his systems failing, his vision darkening. But still he did not falter. With one final effort, he hurled the Emperor into the abyss. Sidious screams echoed through the throne room, a wail of rage, of disbelief, of the Sith's ultimate failure. And then, silence. The Dark Lord of the Sith was no more. The Master had been betrayed. The apprentice had been redeemed. The Empire would fall, and Anakin Skywalker had returned. The galaxy's greatest tyrant, thrown down by the apprentice he had enslaved. Darth Sidious had spent a lifetime bending the galaxy to his will. He had orchestrated wars, toppled governments, eradicated the Jedi, and crowned himself emperor of an empire built on fear. He had ruled through deception, through terror, through absolute control. But in the end, he controlled nothing. As he fell, hurled into the depths of the Death Star's reactor, his final moment was not one of power, but of failure. The Sith Code had always dictated strength. The weak fall so that the strong may rise. It was the rule of two, the foundation of the Sith's survival. There could only be two, a master and an apprentice, until the apprentice became strong enough to take the mantle by force. Sidious had once done the same. He had betrayed his own master, Darth Plagueis, murdering him in his sleep to claim the title of Dark Lord. He had upheld the rule of two as an absolute, an unbreakable law of the Sith. But he had never expected it to be turned against him. Not by Darth Vader. Not by the apprentice he had molded, broken, reforged into something beyond identity, beyond choice. Sidious had believed Vader to be nothing more than a weapon, a shattered husk of a man who had no will beyond that which was given to him. But he had made a mistake. He had underestimated the one thing he could never control. Love, not power, not hatred, not the dark side itself. Love. In the end, the man he had enslaved, the apprentice he had tormented, the warrior he had used as a tool to enforce his will, had turned against him not out of ambition, but out of something far more powerful, a father's love for his son. And so the Emperor fell. Sidious' final scream was not of anger nor of defiance. It was a sound of disbelief. This was not how it was meant to be. He had foreseen so much, manipulated so many. He had survived assassination attempts, outmaneuvered Jedi Masters, crushed rebellions, and twisted the Force itself to his design. He had built an empire that spanned the stars, commanded armies that could not be challenged. And yet, in the end, his death had come not at the hands of a Jedi Knight or an army of rebels, but by the very being he had believed to be utterly broken. The Master had been betrayed. The apprentice had been redeemed. The dark side had failed him. As his body tumbled downward, the crackling energy of his own power surging around him, his mind raced. He had conquered death once, cheated it, manipulated it, learned the secrets his own master had once pursued. Could he do so again? Could he escape this fate, as he had escaped so many others? But there was no escape. His body plunged into the reactor's core, and the darkness consumed him. The Sith Lord who had ruled the galaxy, the mastermind behind its greatest tragedies, was gone. And with him, the Empire's reign began to crumble. Across the stars, the galaxy felt the shift. The shadow that had loomed over it for decades had finally been cast away. The Emperor was dead, the war was won, the Sith were no more, or so it seemed. For darkness never truly dies. It lingers in the forgotten corners of the galaxy, waiting, whispering, reaching through time for a chance to rise again. And somewhere, in the void, the echoes of Darth Sidious' laughter still remained. The galaxy believed Sidious had perished, but the Sith do not surrender to death so easily. For all their victories, the Jedi had never understood the Sith. They had fought them, outlasted them, even destroyed them time and time again. And yet, the dark side endured. Because the Sith did not simply seek power, they sought permanence. Darth Sidious had spent his life ensuring that his rule would never end, not in battle, not in betrayal, and certainly not in death. He had foreseen the day when his enemies would strike him down, and he had prepared for it. The galaxy believed the Emperor had been vanquished, that the fall into the reactor core had been his final moment. The Rebel Alliance celebrated. The Jedi believed balance had been restored, and the Empire crumbled into chaos. But Sidious had known better. He had always known. The Sith did not fall. They waited, they adapted, they returned, and Sidious would return. Long before his apparent demise, Sidious had laid the groundwork for his resurrection. He had never trusted his followers, not his governors, not his warlords, not even his own apprentice. The rule of two demanded betrayal, and Sidious had no intention of suffering the fate of his predecessors. So he devised something greater. The contingency. A plan to ensure that if the Empire could not belong to him, then it would belong to no one. Worlds would burn in his absence. Loyalists would scatter into the void, guided by encrypted orders sealed long before his death. And in the deepest shadows of the galaxy, something else was already waiting. A hidden world. A remnant of the Sith's ancient past. Exegol. The Sith had always been more than a single master and apprentice. For centuries, the dark side had whispered to those willing to listen, drawn the desperate, the ambitious, the fanatical into its grasp. And on Exegol, these disciples had gathered, the Sith Eternal, a secret order of dark side zealots, hidden from the galaxy, sworn to the restoration of the Sith's dominion. Long before his fall, Sidious had cultivated them, molded them, prepared them for a future that only he had foreseen. They were not warriors. They were architects of rebirth, a shadow army that existed for one purpose alone, to bring their emperor back. But Sidious was no fool. Even with their devotion, even with their numbers, faith alone would not be enough. He needed a vessel. The power of the Sith was vast, but the dark side alone could not cheat death. Sidious had learned that lesson from his own master, Darth Plagueis. But where Plagueis had failed, Sidious sought to succeed. The Emperor's scientists had already perfected the art of cloning. Kamino's facilities had proven that life could be replicated. But Sidious did not seek to create mere copies. He sought to transfer his essence, to forge a vessel strong enough to contain the raw power of the dark side. The experiments were nightmarish. The failures, countless. Flesh that decayed upon awakening, minds that collapsed beneath the weight of his will, vessels that could not hold the true might of a Sith Lord. But he persisted. He would not allow himself to fade into the void. And in time, one clone, one vessel, would succeed. The galaxy had thought him gone. The Jedi had believed they had won. But Darth Sidious had never been one to accept defeat. Not in life, and certainly not in death. Even in death, the specter of Sidious loomed over the galaxy, shaping its future. The death of Darth Sidious should have marked the end of the Empire. The galaxy had seen tyrants fall before, warlords defeated, dictators overthrown, civilizations brought to ruin. But none had ruled as completely, as mercilessly as he had. And none had left behind a shadow so vast. Even in death, the Emperor's will lingered. His legacy was not merely in the broken remains of the empire he had built, nor in the ruined war machines left behind in his wake. It was something deeper, something far more dangerous. Fear. For more than 2 decades, the galaxy had known only his rule. Entire generations had lived under his watchful eye, under the crushing weight of imperial control. To the people of the Outer Rim, to the enslaved worlds, to those who had dared to resist, Sidious was not merely a man. He was the storm that had reshaped the very fabric of their existence. And even as his empire crumbled, the fear he had instilled did not fade. It spread. The fall of the Emperor was not the fall of the Empire. It was a wound, but not a death blow. Without their master, the remnants of his vast regime fractured. Some sought to reclaim power for themselves, declaring their own fiefdoms, carving up the remains of the empire like scavengers descending upon a dying beast. Others refused to accept the truth, believing their emperor would return, that the rebellion's victory was nothing more than an illusion. The war did not end. Grand Moff Gideon, Moff Delian Mors, General Sloane. Warlords who had once knelt before Sidious now ruled in his name, seeking to resurrect what had been lost. They commanded fleets, armies, stormtroopers still loyal to the cause, fighting against the inevitable tide of the New Republic. They did not seek peace. They sought restoration. Because to them, the Empire was not just a government, it was order, it was dominance. It was the only way the galaxy could ever be truly controlled. And the greatest of them, the one who would one day rise from the shadows, was waiting. Sidious had never trusted his own empire. He had ruled it, commanded it, bent it to his will, but he had never seen it as his legacy. That legacy, his true vision, was hidden beyond the known galaxy. The seeds had been planted long before his fall. In the deep void of the unknown regions, in the uncharted darkness beyond the Outer Rim, his most loyal followers had prepared for a future only he had foreseen. Exegol, the Sith Eternal. The contingency was never about ensuring the survival of the Empire. It was about ensuring the survival of his empire. Those who were too weak to follow would perish. But the worthy, the loyal, the true believers, they would rebuild. They would take the scattered remnants of his regime and forge them into something stronger. The First Order. Not a remnant, not a memory, but the continuation of a vision that had never truly died. A new army, a new fleet, a new Sith, because Sidious understood something the galaxy did not. The Sith do not fade, they return. And though his body had perished, his vision had not. His shadow had only just begun to rise. The Supreme Leader was not a new threat. He was a whisper of the Emperor's will. The galaxy believed it had escaped the shadow of the Sith. With the fall of Darth Sidious, the Empire crumbled, its warlords scattered, its fleets broken. The Jedi had returned, and the new Republic had risen in the wake of tyranny. But darkness doesn't die so easily. In the years that followed, a new power emerged from the unknown. The First Order, led by a figure as enigmatic as he was terrifying. Supreme Leader Snoke. To the galaxy, he was an enigma, a being of immense power, commanding the dark side with a mastery unseen since the fall of the Sith. He was neither Sith nor Jedi, and yet he wielded the Force with devastating precision. He was ancient, scarred, his very form twisted by unseen horrors. But Snoke was not a conqueror in his own right. He was a vessel, an echo of something far older. The truth of Snoke's origin was buried in secrecy, hidden in the depths of Exegol. He had not risen from the dark side's will, nor had he claimed power through strength and ambition. He had been created, molded in the shadows of the Emperor's grand design. Sidious had foreseen his own demise. He had prepared for it. He had reached beyond death itself to shape the future. And so, from his hidden laboratories, from the arcane sciences of the Sith Eternal, Snoke was born. A construct, a puppet, a tool. The Supreme Leader did not know the full extent of his own existence. He believed himself an independent force, a ruler of destiny. But in truth, he was nothing more than a voice for the Emperor's will, a means by which Sidious could manipulate the galaxy from beyond the grave. Through Snoke, Sidious tested the galaxy's resolve. Through Snoke, he corrupted Ben Solo, twisting him into Kylo Ren, ensuring that the Skywalker lineage would once again serve the dark side. And when Snoke had served his purpose, when his power had reached its peak, he was discarded. A mere vessel, sacrificed in favor of the true return of the Sith. The galaxy had believed it was facing a new war, a new enemy, but it had been fighting an illusion all along. Snoke was never meant to rule. He was never meant to be the endgame. He was merely a shadow of the Emperor's will, a phantom manipulated from the depths of Exegol. The Sith had not returned, because they had never truly left. And as the Supreme Leader fell, his purpose fulfilled, the true master of the dark side prepared to reclaim his throne. Sidious had waited long enough. Was Sidious the greatest Sith of all time, or simply the most patient? For 1,000 years, the Sith had schemed, biding their time in the shadows, waiting for the moment to strike. Countless dark lords had risen and fallen, each seeking ultimate power, each undone by their own ambition, their own impatience. And yet among them all, one name stood above the rest: Darth Sidious. He was not the strongest duelist, nor the most gifted sorcerer. Others had wielded the Force with greater ferocity, had carved their names into legend through sheer destructive might. But what Sidious understood, what no Sith before him had truly mastered, was that the dark side was more than power. It was control. He did not seek glory on the battlefield. He did not need to lead legions into war. Instead, he waged war in silence, conquering the galaxy not with a blade, but with a whisper. By the time his enemies realized what he was, it was already too late. Was there ever a Sith Lord who played the game better? Sidious did not simply overthrow the Jedi. He made them unwitting participants in their own downfall. He twisted the Republic into a weapon against itself, orchestrated a war that ensured his enemies would destroy each other, and rose to power not by force, but by invitation. He did not defy the Jedi. He made them irrelevant. And when the time came, he did not crush them in open battle. He erased them with a single command. Execute Order 66, a whisper in the darkness, a command that echoed across the stars, and with it, 1,000 years of Jedi supremacy ended in an instant. The Sith had always sought power, but Sidious redefined its meaning. For the ancient Sith, power had been strength, conquering worlds, commanding armies, striking down rivals. But Sidious understood that true power was not in strength alone. It was in patience, in foresight, in the ability to shape fate itself. He was not content with mere rule. He did not seek to be a warlord, a tyrant who would eventually be overthrown. He sought to make himself eternal. His control did not end with his death. His influence lingered, his plans unfolding long after he was thought defeated. His hand could be felt in the rise of the First Order, in the creation of Snoke, in the whispered secrets of Exegol. And in the end, even death was not enough to stop him. The Jedi believed they had won, that the Sith had been destroyed, that balance had been restored. But Sidious had left them with one final truth. The dark side is a pathway to many abilities, some consider to be unnatural, a warning, a lesson, a promise. Because the Sith do not fade, they wait. And somewhere, in the forgotten corners of the galaxy, the dark side still stirs, waiting for the next master.